Dear sisters and brothers, I greet you in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ and on behalf of the Council for World Mission. We are gathered here in the South Asia region and here in Bangladesh as part of the work of CWM to hold a regional mission council in all of our regions. We're grateful to you for gathering here, and we trust that it will be a time of celebration, a time of rejoicing, and a time of recommitting ourselves to the mission to which God has called us. We're grateful for the gift of Reverend Julie Sims, who comes to this region with energy and passion and commitment to serve you. We are grateful to you for giving her the space and the opportunity to give so much. And we trust that together you will grow and become all that God wills for our lives in this place and time. Many are the issues with which we must contend, but by God's grace I believe that we are more than able to do that which will make a difference in our world today. Allow me then to address you on the topic healing relationships, hope for a new spirituality. This for me is a question of do or die. In the movie Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, 4 teenagers discover an old video game console with a game they had never heard of. They are immediately thrust into the game's jungle setting and the bodies of their aviators. What they discover is that they just don't play Jumanji. Jumanji plays them. It is a dangerous adventure and they must pursue it or they will stuck to the game forever. As these teenagers face the dangers of their new environment and the adventure of saving Jumanji, they come to discover that they are in a life or death situation and they need each other far more than they would imagine. Sometimes we do not appreciate how much we need each other, and this is exactly what is going on in this story. But these are the words from the movie that resonate with me. We can help each other. We must have to stick together. Unless we help each other, we will all die. We only have one life. It all depends on how we choose to live it. We can all do it together because between us, we have lots of strength. These are the words that speak to my heart. I hope they speak to you as well. These teenagers encountered many challenges along the way, but they knew that their survival and their destiny rest with sticking together and drawing on each other's strengths. In the end, they saved Jumanji and survived the dangers, toils, and snares. In a broken, dying world such as we experience it today, we would do well to draw lessons and insights from this movie because far more than we know it or wish to admit it, we need each other. In the movie, each one started on his or her own selfish trek, keen to identify the faults in the other, but soon discovered that their very life depended on the other. Strengths and weaknesses alike constituted the gift of each of them, and they had to embrace that. In Ebony and Ivory, Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder express it right. We all know that people are the same wherever we go. There's good and bad in every one of us. Learn to live when we learn to give each other what we need to survive together alive. I suggest to you that relationships are broken because we have not learned to receive each other as we truly are. God's immaculate work of goodness. And we have not allowed ourselves to acknowledge our utter dependence on each other for our own survival. So in the next few minutes, please join me on a journey as we explore the theme, healing relationships, hope for a new spirituality. On this journey, I will explore God's creation as an architecture of harmony and synergy, brokenness as a departure from the epistemology of life, and community as a springboard for spiritualities of trust and resistance. I will then conclude with a story about what is going on in the world. Let me begin then by talking about creation as an architecture of harmony and synergy. The architecture of creation was a synergistic flow of delicately interwoven fabric, connecting all aspects of life into an orchestra. Genesis chapters 1 and 2 provide an overview of the healthy relationship between the creator and the created, in which God is the chief actor. Having created the heavens and the earth, night and day, greater and lesser light, land and sea, rivers and streams, wetlands and drylands, fish of the seas and birds of the air, and all kinds of living creatures that inhabit the earth, vegetations of all kinds, fruit-bearing trees, trees for food, and trees meant to provide knowledge and beauty. It was time for God to make humankind, and that which brings to its zenith the perfection and glory of God's creation. So, God created humankind in God's image, male and female. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. See, I have given you everything that has breath of life." God saw everything that God had made, and indeed, it was very good. Genesis 1, 27 to 31. This is a story of creation, an architecture of beauty and splendor. God is intentional about creation, and on human beings, God has placed value. God has placed inestimable value, honor, and responsibility on humankind. According to the psalmist, God has made humankind just a little lower than the angels and crowned him and her with glory. According to the creation narrative, God takes a profound interest in humankind. Thinking about the needs of humanity, God said to Adam, "You may eat freely of every tree in the garden, save one." And as God continued to ponder the needs of humanity, God declared, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper and a partner." And with that, God set out to work. And with absolute precision, God created and created until finally woman was created and brought to man. A gift too precious and comely to ignore. "At last," says Adam, "this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman." Or, as the preacher puts it, he looks at her with admiration and adoration and said, "Woman." Whoa, this expression of delight. So this is a creation story, a deliberate architecture intentionally interwoven as an ecosystem of support and companionship for each other. And God is pleased and calls it good. Very good indeed. Perhaps the greatest statement of the whole creation narrative is that which is tucked away in the very last few words of chapter 2 of Genesis. "And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." Nothing no bodily distortion, no emotional flaw, no intellectual impediment, no moral lapse, nothing said or done exposing our nakedness need lead to shame. Nothing. God made us to love and honor each other, to see each other through the characteristics and features of our own personality and physicality, so that we can be confident in the presence of each other, warts and all. God made us in God's image, declaring us very good, and nothing will change that even when we have wandered far away from God. Nakedness without shame is a sign of emotional connectivity, of deep and abiding trust in each other, of compassionate care, of true respect and adoration. God has made humankind to love and to care for one another. We are part of the tapestry of God's creative ingenuity, and we were made for relationship. Relationship with God, relationship with each other, and relationship with the earth. The one other thing that needs to be said, indeed, the most important about God in relationship with humanity is that we were made for fellowship and partnership with God. You and I were made for fellowship and partnership with God. Humanity is part of the plan of God to keep God's creation together. When God said to Adam, "You shall die if you eat of this particular tree," God was calling humanity to a relationship of obedience and trust, and to form a partnership with God in the care of God's possession that would sustain life in perpetuity. And we observe the pain of God as God walked through the garden in the cool of the evening and took notice that the treasure of God's creation had disobeyed, thereby breaching the bond of trust and breaking the tie that binds them in relationship. And yet God will not surrender. God refused to give up on humanity. Adam and Eve were to see the unconditional and boundless love of God on display. God sewed fig leaves together and clothed their nakedness, thereby preserving their dignity and affirming their worth. You and I are God's handiwork. You and I are God's masterpiece. On us, God has placed inestimable value. And with this endowment, we are expected to live with integrity, with honor, and in fellowship with God and with everyone and everything that God loves. So that's where I begin to talk about this architecture, this tapestry, this beautiful synergy that God has created that we call creation. But let me move on to talk about the brokenness as a departure from the epistemology of life. Brokenness. This theme, healing relationship, hope for a new spirituality, is an acknowledgement that something has gone terribly wrong with the beautiful creation that God made and declared good, very good. In God's design, all things are held together in perfect harmony and synergy. but that design has been disrupted. God's purpose and instruction for humankind to have responsibility and stewardship of all creation has been compromised. Man and woman were to be in partnership in which each takes care of the other and where mutual respect defines the nature of their relationship. But this flow has been disturbed. Truth be spoken, sin has entered the camp and the path to destruction has been paved. A seed of doubt was planted in Adam's consciousness and it infiltrated all of life. It came in the form of a subtle question. Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? It appears innocent, does it not? But behind this question is something far more sinister, and that comes in the barefaced lie that follows. You shall not die. Instead, your eyes will be open and you will be like God. This is the beginning of a downward spiral, and today we are reaping the fruits of human disobedience, jealousy, and pride. Once Adam and Eve disobeyed God's instruction, relationship broke down and the pronouncement that you shall surely die became a reality. Their act of disobedience was that they stole from themselves. Think about that. They stole from themselves. They ate from the tree that was meant to sustain life, preserve their dignity, and build harmony and trust. What's more, rather than affirming, supporting, and drawing strength from each other in that most difficult moment of their lives, they entered a blame game, demeaning and destroying each other. It's the woman you gave me. It is a serpent. And it goes on and on and on. God expects us to treat each other with care and respect, and for us to live in harmony rather than to be consumed with greed and attitudes of superiority and supremacy. In God's design, no aspect of creation, no nation, no race, no species is to act as superior to the rest of creation. We all belong together, and we are dependent on each other for our highest good. We are helpers and partners of each other, together with God. CWM's call for healing of relationship recognizes the urgent need of humanity's reconciliation with God, with one another, and with the earth. We are committed to God's intention for all creation, human and non-human, to experience and enjoy life of quality. For all aspects of God's creation to be in sync with each other, and for human beings to respond to God's call for reconciliation. We believe that at the core of worship to God is a commitment to faithful relationship with God, with one another, and with the earth. Such faithfulness requires us to put God first in all our relationships and to listen to God for direction in how we relate to one another. I'm just returning from a meeting of ecumenical panel on NIFIA, New International Financial and Economic Architecture, where we once again reiterate the view that a financial system of speculation, competition, and inadequate regulation has failed to serve the people and instead has denied a decent standard of living for the majority of the world's population. In a statement released by WCC, the WCRC, LWF and CWM, we stated that since the 2008 financial crisis, socioeconomic divides have widened significantly in all countries, whether developed or developing. Indeed, wealth concentration today is at its highest level since the 19th century. Harsh austerity measures in response to the crisis and the overall failure of the prevailing financial framework to deliver on its promise of generating shared prosperity are helping to create the conditions for the rising extremism, protectionism, racism, and xenophobia we see in many parts of the world today. The destabilization of economies is exacerbating civil and international conflicts. Threats of war are shaping many financial policies, expanding military budgets in many countries, and preventing spending on public health, education, and social care. It is true that those who suffer most in this present financial climate are those who are at the very bottom of the economic pile. Women, persons living with disability, indigenous people, those living on the margins in one way or the other. Simply put, we are experiencing a spiritual crisis of extraordinary proportion. Humanity is broken. The creation is groaning. The world is in turmoil. As God's partners, we have departed from our core. We have allowed the love of money to blind our eyes to the intrinsic worth of every other person created in the image of God. We have denied ourselves of the joy of laughter, the innocence that comes with trust, and the peace of knowing that we are in fellowship with those whom God has given to us for our mutual growth and prosperity. We need a spirituality which has power over money. A spirituality that is rooted in trust, interconnectedness, and positive regard for all of life. It is this reality of interconnectedness which sees all of life as an ecosystem of care and support for each other, and in which our obedience to God and reliance on each other becomes the basis of our transactions and engagement. That is what offers hope of a future and life in fullness for all creation. CWM's focus on legacies of slavery is revealing that ideologies of supremacy still have a stronghold on life, and that blackness in particular is still stigmatized. The legacies of slavery is a project of CWM where we are actually retracing the path of the Atlantic slave trade, or rather trade in Africans. So we have started in Europe, we have gone to the Caribbean, we have been to Accra in Ghana, and we will end in the United States of America. Retracing our steps, the horrible part of history where white supremacy did its worst, and where humankind suffered at the hand of each other in ways too painful to describe. In this project, we are seeking to hear the laments of people, to reflect on the legacies, and to ask questions about what is the place of CWM in all of this, especially that we, through our antecedent organization, the London Missionary Society, did participate in the collusion with empire and in ways that made life miserable for others, even in the name of the gospel. This project is enabling us to focus on the realities of ideologies of supremacy, and that marginalized communities continue to suffer injustice in ways far too painful to mention. An example of this injustice is the action of the UK government towards the Windrush generation. People from the Caribbean invited to the United Kingdom to support its labor force following the shortage of manpower in the aftermath of the Second World War, who contributed to building its economy for decades, are now being told that they have no legal status in that country. This is reminiscent of the ongoing hardship being faced by the Rohingya community. And we are here in this context where hundreds of thousands of Rohingya people have had to flee from their country for some degree of security. They have been rejected, persecuted, and made stateless. The largest group of stateless people in the world are the Rohingya people. The hardships being experienced by these groups of people at this time is inordinate, and there seems to be little care or concern about their plight. So the question being posed by the Legacies of Slavery project are these: how do churches live as missional communities in places of racist and colonial violence? How do we nurture our children in the face of racism, xenophobia, homophobia, protectionism, and other forms of hate crimes and ideologies of supremacy? How do we as Christians resist the ideology of spiritual supremacy that justifies our indifference to the suffering of those that do not worship God in the way we do? And how do we build resilient and life-affirming communities that can provide employment, security, and trust for all? What will it take? What will it take to establish a new epistemology in which the intrinsic worth of every human being and the integrity of creation is honored, respected, and affirmed by all? What will it take? And it is with this question then that I invite you to the third movement of my presentation. Communities of hope as the springboard for spiritualities of trust and resistance. This theme of hope has been what CWM has been focusing on since 2012. In 2012 in Pango Pango, we declared that hope is a language of life. And in 2012, we talked about healing and declared that if we as a people of God would commit ourselves to hope in action, then we can join God in the quest for healing. Healing of the broken body, healing of relationships, healing of the future. Hope is that which keeps us in a constant state of discontent, holy rage, and agitation, never satisfied with living in the lowlands of impoverishment of spirit and settling for less than God's best for us and for those around us. When communities are inspired by hope, we reject the death-dealing culture of consumerism and greed, and we set our gaze beyond the boundaries of imagination and the range of sight where God dwells, providing richly for all our needs according to God's riches in glory. Communities inspired by hope are committed to bridging the divide and to heal the brokenness that prevents us from being our best, from giving our best, and from demanding the best in others. Communities of hope point us to a future where the chains of injustice are broken, the determination to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery is rekindled, and the capacity for relationships marked by honesty, integrity, and respect for others is heightened and energized. When hope is the defining characteristic of community life, the spirituality of trust emerges and opens our eyes to our common creatureliness, pointing us to our fragility and our interdependence. This spirituality of trust holds us together in a relationship of interconnectedness where we can join hands and hearts together from everywhere in a commitment to pursue justice and peace. A spirituality of trust binds us together in a solidarity that enables us to take on the mission to which Jesus committed himself and to which he called us, a mission of life in fullness for all creation. A spirituality of trust is the grounding for life in community, where power is not defined by money nor militarism, but by our willingness to share what we have with each other and our humility to receive from each other as they are able, so that together we may be strong. It is that strength that comes from our giving and receiving that hope is about, that trust is about, that leaning on each other is all about. And it is to that that I believe God is calling us. Hope is not only about trust, but hope is also the springboard for life in community that evokes a spirituality of resistance. A spirituality of resistance which emboldens us to name the enemy to life and gives us courage to confront it with audacity and fortitude. A spirituality of resistance is the motivation to dance in Babylon, to cope with being in the belly of empire while living out the alternative with clarity and conviction. A spirituality of resistance understands worship as subversive and counter-empire. Such worship declares that Jesus and no other is Lord of all. No other. No powers, nor principalities, no money, nor military might, no presidents or kings or queens of our time. Jesus and no other is Lord of all. As such, a spirituality of resistance is impatient with the broken relationship that seems to define life today and is prepared to fight for what is right and to participate in the struggle with those in the plight of poverty. Communities of hope are prepared to acknowledge that we are all part of a hostile history, marked by ideologies of supremacy and exploitation. Communities of hope know that we are all robbed and diminished by our selfishness and greed, white or black, male or female, citizens or migrants, Christians or Muslims, privileged or dispossessed, the oppressor or the oppressed. We are all diminished. Every single one of us, irrespective of where we are on the social landscape. Communities of hope are committed to the healing of relationships, and as such, communities are prepared to muster the courage to name these realities for what they truly are. Sin. Sin against God, the Creator, and sin against each other, whom God has given for our mutual enrichment and growth. Communities of hope will honestly confront the demon within us and among us that perpetrate and perpetuate unjust relationships, and work together for a new social order where greed is checked, consumerism is regulated, the earth's resources are justly distributed, the environment protected from pollution, and human dignity honored and preserved. God, our Creator, has brought us into community where all our resources, strengths, and weaknesses combined are used to enrich each other, to care for the environment, and ultimately to bring glory and honor to God. God, our Creator, gives hope to community so that we may cultivate the spiritualities of trust and resistance in order to bridge the divide and live in peace with justice towards one another. All of Jesus' ministry was centered around community, in striking contrast to how the Roman Empire was organized. As disciples of Jesus, we too are called to build life-affirming communities where all are welcomed and none is denied a place. And so, my friends, I remind us that by our own human efforts, we are doomed to failure. By our own human efforts, nothing positive will ever emerge. But by the power of God's Spirit, communities of hope will come into being. Spiritualities of trust and resistance will move us beyond ourselves to new horizons of our faith journey and summon from the deep recesses of our hearts the impulse for justice, the courage to confess, and the grace to forgive. So we're talking about healing relationships, hope for a new spirituality, or perhaps not so new. Perhaps a renewed spirituality of trust and resistance. Spiritualities that ground us in our faith. Spiritualities that enable us to understand God in God's intention for a creation that is in harmony and sync, and a creation that honors God and gives God the glory that God deserves. A spirituality that allows us to see Jesus as Lord of all and to lay our lives in concert with God's design for justice and peace, so that all may live together in a community that is life-giving. So let me conclude with a story. I name it Correcting the Error. Once upon a time, a story was being written. The story was to be 4 paragraphs long, and 4 writers were charged with the responsibility to each write a paragraph. The story, with all its paragraphs, was to be written on 1 page. However, the first writer wrote in such large letters that his paragraph filled the page. Ever since, being dissatisfied with the outcome, the writers have been trying desperately to correct the error, hoping to have all 4 paragraphs fit on one page. And this is how the story concludes. And this is what is going on in the world. Ever since that time when one writer wrote in such big letters that his paragraph filled the page, the writers have been trying desperately to rearrange things. That is what is wrong with the world. Broken. God's design of creation has been corrupted by our sinfulness, but God remains interested in the interconnectivity and interdependence of creation, and God is committed to preserving its purity and its power. This is what is going on in the world today. The beautiful world that God created is broken because those to whom God gave stewardship of it have failed. The first writer has written in such large letters that his paragraph fills the page. God is walking through the garden once again, asking the questions, where are you? Where is your brother? What have you done? We have cheated on ourselves. We have cheated ourselves of the provision that God has made for us, the earth and all that is in it. We have broken the trust within the human family, thereby robbing ourselves of the dignity that comes with loving and caring for one another. The peace that comes with treating each other with respect and the joy of sharing fellowship with each other. In essence, those of us to whom God has given stewardship of creation have departed from the plan of God, desecrated God's beautiful design, destroyed the very source of our own health and well-being, and now desperately groping in the abyss of frustration, fatalism, and futility. However, the good news is that we are here today. We are here today because we are people of faith and hope. And because we believe that we can make a difference, we are here today for no other reason. We are here because we believe that we can be part of the change we desire. As Pope Francis put it, many things have to change, but it is we human beings above. Many things have to change, but it is we human beings above. If we are able to lament our brokenness, we can in like manner do something about it. So, in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, I call us to action. Let us commit ourselves to the principles of mutuality and partnership. Let us agree to own the problem and to share the solution. Let us confess our complicity and commit ourselves to hope in action. Let us pray together for healing of the breach and the restoration of community. Let us resolve together to reclaim our dignity, to build social trust, to cultivate the alternative, and to be the change we desire. Healing, hope in action, healing for a better world, healing relationships, hope for our renewed spirituality, healing, God's intention for humanity and the creation. Healing, God's gift to all of life. Amen.